Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this AGM, so Annual General Meeting in PEP. We are about to start the presentation of new proposals in this new project on climate change and women, gender. So this is not the first activity of this AGM, as you know, as most of the participants know. I mean, you already have been trained in best practices for policy engagement and technical training on gender and climate change policy analysis of the last 2 weeks. But this is I'm very excited because it's the very first time that PEP focused one of its program on climate change. We had in the past various projects on covering climate change issues, but it is really the very first time that we are focusing on climate change. And for this, of course, I'm particularly very grateful to the Global Affairs Canada for funding this initiative on climate change in Africa, impacts and responses for women and girls. At the same time, before leaving the word to Carly Hayes, let me just a few words. Thank you very much to the teams for the very long selection process that they've been doing over the last months. I think that they submitted the proposal back in September or something like that. And then they took the full graduate course at Laval University. So it's very long process. Then, of course, I'm particularly grateful to PEP resource persons. And some of them, you will meet some of them in a few minutes or later today. And then, of course, I'm very grateful to the PEP Secretariat for making this conference possible. It's really always amazing. Unfortunately, we are still a virtual distance, and in any case, then. So I am Luca Tiberti. I'm a professor at Laval University and Florence University, and research director in PEP. So I would now like to give the words to Carly Hayes. Carly is a program officer for international assistance research and knowledge at Global Affairs Canada, working to strengthen the evidence base and support capacity building of research institutions in the global South. So please, Carly, it's up to you. Just one words before I forgot. Unfortunately, we received a notification from Michael Zanshao. Sorry for the pronunciation. He was supposed to discuss the second paper of today. Unfortunately, he's unwell, so he will be sharing his comments, his discussion by email. So we will have about 7-8 minutes more for discussion. So please, Carly.
Great. Thank you so much, Luca. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well. Thanks.
Wonderful. So hello, everyone. And let me extend my words of welcome as well to this presentation of shortlisted project proposals as part of PEP's initiative on climate change in Africa, impacts and responses for women and girls. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to PEP for extending the invitation to chair these presentations and for organizing what I'm sure will be an insightful and engaging session. Just as a couple of words of opening remarks, we know that when the natural environment is threatened, long-term development gains are diminished, and the poorest and most vulnerable people, particularly women and girls, are disproportionately impacted. Yet women and girls can be powerful agents of change when they are empowered to make decisions on the access and control of environmental resources. Global Affairs Canada is pleased to support this initiative, which is contributing new evidence and analysis to improve the design and implementation of gender-responsive climate change policies across the region. The project supported under this initiative will generate critical research on how policymakers can recognize and support women and girls as beneficiaries and leaders in national climate strategies. The effective generation, communication, and use of high-quality evidence to design gender-responsive climate change policies is at the heart of Canada's commitment to evidence-based decision-making under our feminist international assistance policy. I look forward to learning more about your proposals, and thank you for sharing your ideas with us. And now just to go over a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this session. You will receive links to watch your sessions again after the annual conference has concluded. While you are not speaking, we ask that you please make sure your microphone is turned off, and you are welcome to keep your camera on. And while you are presenting, we ask that you please turn your camera on if your connection permits. I will invite discussants to turn on their cameras and microphones to give their comments after the presentations. And if there is time, we'll also take questions from the room, in which case I encourage those called on to speak to turn on their camera and microphone. If there's not time for Q&A, and I invite you to use the chat box to ask questions to the presenters. And with that, I'm pleased to turn the floor to today's first presenter. So Marshall Makate will be presenting on long-term impact of climate shocks on human capital accumulation of women in Zimbabwe. Marshall is an economist and a senior lecturer in the School of Public Health at Curtin University. His research interests are in health economics, economic evaluation, policy analysis, measurement, and explanation of health disparities, and applied agricultural economics. He's also currently affiliated with the University of Zimbabwe as a research fellow in the Department of Economics. He is a former Fulbright fellow who holds a first-class bachelor's and master's degrees in economics from the University of Zimbabwe, as well as an MA and PhD degree from the State University of New York at Albany in New York. Marshall, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much. My apologies, I had some technical problems with my computer. Let me just link into my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Now we have the presentation presenter view, so you might want to switch. Yeah, that's good. That's the one we need.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present our work. So the title is, we are focusing on the long-term impact of climate shocks on human capital accumulation of women in Zimbabwe. And allow me to acknowledge my colleagues, Molokadi, Auxilia, Gracious, Benson, and Clifton, who all assisted in this study. So I'll take you briefly through the context, the research project in terms of the questions and objectives, the methodology and data, the descriptive statistics, and some of the expected policy implications. So in terms of the motivation for this study, primarily from Zimbabwe, we have experienced persistent problems in terms of the macroeconomic aspects. That's like the overall problems in the country. And we sort of realized that most of the groups that are at a disadvantage are women and children, and particularly those women who are unemployed. And we noticed that access to health services, particularly for women who are pregnant and those who are having children, particularly living in the rural areas, they have some challenges in accessing basic health services. So that was part of also the motivation. And we noticed some sort of impact like across the socioeconomic gradients, like the differences. So in terms of just looking at this study, we sort of thought maybe we could look at outcomes such as health outcomes for women and education, which all have implications on the health status for women in overall, and also the outcomes for their children, as well as the education outcomes for women. That's the overall context that this study situates. So we sort of also observe that women, particularly not necessarily from rural backgrounds, but in general, they have a low voice or within their household. So that is the empowerment that we will focus on in this study. So just moving on in for the project, the overall objective for the project, we seek to examine the persistent impact of a climate shock or around the time of birth. And we particularly focus on the impact on education and health outcomes. That's the aspect on human capital accumulation. And the specific research objectives, I'm sorry, for the specific research questions that we seek to answer are as follows. What is the impact of climate shock during early life on the health and education outcomes of women, particular focus on adolescents and young adults in Zimbabwe? And when we say health, we sort of, it's just overall, but we are actually looking at specific outcomes. I will give examples in the data section. And the second aspect that we are interested in is to sort of ask the question, does the impact of a climate shock on human capital accumulation depend on the level of female empowerment, or sort of the extent to which women are empowered in terms of their decision making, whether with regards to their health or the health of their children, or in terms of just making decisions relating to financial aspect within their household. So those are sort of the aspects that we sort of seek to understand, to see if there's any moderating effect. And we want also to sort of appraise the impact of public policy, how public policy has impacted in sort of mitigating the impact of climate change or climate shocks on the health and education outcomes. And lastly, we are a little bit ambitious. We also want to sort of understand some of the potential mechanisms or pathways through which climate shock could impact these outcomes that we are looking at. So that's the high-level research questions that we seek to look at. And in terms of the specific policy questions that we seek to answer, we want to understand how can we mitigate the impact of climate change. So from a policy point of view, they're asking how can they mitigate the impact of climate change on human capital accumulation. Human capital accumulation, I will just refer that to human capital accumulation, but I'm actually focusing on education and the health outcomes. So in the second one is, how can the current education policy be adapted to improve girls' access to education, for example, or how can that policy be adapted to improve sort of the health outcomes for these girls? So that's another question that from a policy perspective. And the last one being, we want to sort of, the policymakers will sort of, we're prompting them to ask how the current national climate policy can be adapted to mitigate the impact of climate shocks on women's capital accumulation. So those are sort of the policy questions that we are interested in looking at. So just looking at the potential ways through which a climate shock could propagate or could affect the outcomes that we are interested in. So in terms of the health outcomes, we are focusing on outcomes relating to fertility. So the number of births or the number of children that a particular woman has given birth to within the last 5 years. We also have variations or whether within the last 3 years, and also some indicators of whether that birth was actually classified as an early birth, if you would say. So sort of like, did they give birth within the teenage years, for example, or before reaching the age of 18. So we have some variations in terms of fertility. And we're also looking at some anthropometric indicators in terms of their height for age for these women, some outcomes related to the pregnancy, whether it was wanted, when it was actually conceived, and some outcomes relating to HIV-related knowledge. And the mechanism that we sort of, through reading through the literature, has been sort of a climate shock has an impact on the crop productivity or crop outcomes. And because in Zimbabwe, about 60% of the households, they sort of reside in rural areas, they largely depend on agriculture. So smallholder farming is a big thing in the country. So we think that the climate shock will have an immediate impact on crop outcome, and that is going to manifest in sort of reduced capacity to sort of buy goods and services within the market. So sort of that reduced household income and also food availability. And that is overall going to affect resource availability within the household. And we have proxies for these sort of measures of resource availability. And we sort of reading through much of the outcomes that we are looking at, that's sort of part of the mechanism that the climate shock is going to impact on health outcomes. And similarly, we focus on health outcomes, on education outcomes. We are looking at the likelihood of finishing secondary education for women, and also the total completed years of schooling. And we think that climate change is going also to impact same mechanism as described in Mancini and Young, but also there's another aspect that it's going to impact on sort of outcomes in infancy, and that is going also to affect their developmental abilities as they go on. Because we are looking at the impact of the climate shock at the time of birth for these women. So that is sort of a shock that occurred many years ago, and we're sort of inferring sort of as we move along the life course, how some outcomes relating to their health and some outcomes relating to their education has been impacted. So that's sort of the potential mechanism that we expect the shock to propagate. So in terms of the methodology, we are following a simple specification where we have the outcomes of interest. In this case, we are looking at health and education as our measures of capital accumulation, and as a function of the climate shock, and a vector of characteristics X, which these characteristics are believed to impact on either health or education outcomes. And sort of putting it here as sort of, it's all clustered in. I didn't want to separate education and health and some, but we have variations on the specific characteristics that go in the vector X. So this vector also includes things like the age of the woman, the region sort of where they live, so region fixed effects, the survey fixed effects, and among other variables that are important in influencing education and health. So the shocks that we consider there, we sort of capturing the agricultural rainy season in Zimbabwe, and we follow what other studies have done in terms of defining these shocks. And so the simple basic formulation that we put here, we estimate that using an ordinary least squares regression, and identification is primarily achieved through the variability in the spatial and temporal variation of our data within the climate shocks. And we sort of cluster our standard errors or the standard errors or at the primary sampling unit, as well as we incorporate the time fixed effects as well as the region fixed effects in that setup. So in terms of sort of incorporating female empowerment in the mix, we are sort of now we recognize the fact that, so actually going back to the previous slide, we sort of, there are some variables that will obviously give us trouble in terms of endogeneity and things like that, so sort of variables like that have been identified in the literature as potentially endogenous, things like marital status, and things like that. So we sort of, in the basic formulation, we sort of exclude those variables, but in some sensitive tests, we will also consider including those variables to test our robustness of our findings. So looking at the moderating effect of female empowerment, since that's sort of our innovation, trying to understand whether cultural norms in terms of how women are actually recognized within the household, does that sort of feed back into either poor outcomes in terms of health or education. So we think that maybe because of lack of empowerment within the household, the culture, there's sort of a neglect on the girl child because maybe they think they are less important, and sort of that's has been the tradition. Definitely not in my time when I was growing up, but a little bit generation from my mom's side of the family, where that part of the countryside where females have sort of this low status. So it's still an issue in some parts of the country. So we sort of want to test that to see if that is having some form of moderating effect. But we all recognize the fact that empowerment, female empowerment, could potentially be endogenous in the sense that there are factors or some specific characteristics that are associated with health. At the same time, also some unobserved factors that impact both female empowerment as well as health that we need to be worried about in terms of the bias to our estimates. So we sort of mitigate that bias by adopting an instrument of variable regression. In this instrument of variable regression, because we understand that finding very good instruments could be a problem. So we use this common procedure in economics that is called the leave one out means. So we sort of calculate a cluster average of the empowerment variable in our study, and we're sort of excluding the reference woman in that setting. So we think that average empowerment within neighboring clusters should be correlated with empowerment, but we have no reason to believe that empowerment in other sort of clusters has any bearing on the individual level outcome. So that's been the methodology this far. And in terms of empowerment, we are going to be using a series of sort of indicators that are captured within our data to create an index that sort of proxy this empowerment level within the household. So variables like we have whether the woman has decision-making power in terms of their health, in terms of health for their children, whether they are able to make decisions with regards to large purchases within the household, or purchasing sort of making important household decisions and the like. So we have sort of several variables that we can use to create that empowerment index. So we sort of, I didn't put that here because I didn't want to put it like a lot of information, but we're sort of familiar with how this process works, because in our previous work, we've actually created this index. So moving to the data, our primary data source will be the demographic and health survey for Zimbabwe, and we are particularly pulling across multiple years, and we focus on 2005, 2010, and 2015 for now, because that's where much of our outcomes that we're interested in actually have very good coverage in terms of the number of observations and not a lot of missing. So that will sort of allow us to pull that data. And like I said, the health outcomes we focus on in terms of stature for women, fertility-related outcomes, pregnancy wantedness, and HIV-related health knowledge. And in terms of variables like pregnancy wantedness, so this will be a binary indicator, for example, whether at the time of conception, the woman actually wanted the child or they did not want the child, and things like that. So we're also looking at HIV-related knowledge. So we have a series of variables that sort of measure whether a particular individual is knowledgeable about HIV. So things like, for example, if they believe that HIV could be treated by traditional means, or by if they are sort of thinking that maybe it could be transmitted through witchcraft and things like that. So we have several variables that will sort of proxy that. And health outcomes, like I say, it's number of schooling years completed at the time of the survey, and whether the woman had completed secondary education. And climate data, we are taking that from the University of Delaware's Geography Department, and we look at both rainfall and temperature, and we follow the previous literature in terms of how we measure the climate shocks. For example, a negative climate shock, we are going to measure that if the long run standard historical averages, if the long run standard deviation in a particular month is sort of below, it falls below the 20th percentile this is based on the previous literature, and a positive innovation in this similar is defined in a similar way, but it's it's an indicator that takes one if the deviation that I've described is above the 80th percentile, and we measure our shocks as dummy variables in each context. And so for climate, for temperature, that would be the same process we follow as well. So just in terms of the basic descriptive statistics, I thought maybe we could look at the high level averages across the DHA survey years we're interested in. And in terms of years of schooling, the average years of schooling is about 7.8 years. You can pretty much see that it is increased over time because of the education policy that was implemented in 1980. Maybe the effects we can still observe up to now. And secondary schooling is still roughly around 63% from 2005, and it is increased a little bit up to 70%. In terms of fertility, we see that about the number of births on average about 0.5, and that has been consistent over the years. And the height, we have that in centimeters, and it's about 160 across. And we will define the height for age z-scores using that information on the height and the gender. And our in terms of expected policy implications, we intend to formulate policies or inform policy that the need to incorporate women in terms of their socioeconomic position within the household. So like in terms of education, in terms of health policy, we need to make sure that our policies that are designed incorporate the aspects of empowerment that take recognition that women are disadvantaged in many respects, including that decision making. And we want to have a close look at the education policy to see how best it can incorporate aspects that will promote, protect women from climate variability and change, similarly to the current climate policy, to see how this could be also adapted to consider the impact to women and their children. So that's it from me, and allow me to give my team. In terms of the team, we have Benson and Auxilia. They're both economists from the Ministry of Finance, and they will help us with the aspects with regards to policy. And we have Molog Hadi, Mojapelo, who she's an economist, and she will help us through particularly the literature review and the data analysis. And Clifton has some expertise in agriculture economics, and is going to also assist us in the economic analysis and results interpretation. And Gracious has experience also in translation and methodological as well. So she will going to get her assistance on the estimation and the data cleaning process of the study. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marshall. I'd now like to welcome today's discussants for this session. Our first discussant is Ruth Magreta. Ruth is a lecturer and postdoctoral fellow at Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. She's also working as an international consultant for the International Center on Tropical Agriculture. She received her BSc and MSc degrees at the University of Malawi, Bunda College. Her main research interests focus on farmers' decision-making processes amidst climate change, adaptation strategies to climate shocks, forecasting the economic performance of food crops amidst climate change, gender analysis, and mapping project activities using geographical information systems. And then you've met our second discussant for today's, for the first presentation, Luca Tiberti. Luca is a PEP resource person and the scientific director of PEP's micro policy analysis team. He holds a PhD in development economics from the University of Florence. His main research interests are applied microeconomics, poverty, and socioeconomic impacts of climate shocks. Since November 2020, he is an assistant professor at the University of Florence. He has published in many journals such as the Economic Development and Cultural Change, American Journal of Agricultural Economics, World Development, Food Policy, the Review of Income and Wealth, European Review of Agricultural Economics, Journal of Development Studies, Journal of Nutrition, and Economics of Transition and Journal of African Economies. So Ruth, I'll invite you to provide your comments and questions first.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you so much, Dr. Marshall McCarthy, for your nice presentation. So for my comments, allow me to take off my video so that I don't have internet disconnectivity. So I'll go off for now. Okay. So we've heard about the paper the proposal by Dr. McCarthy and the team, whose main objective is to explore the impact of adverse climatic shocks during early life on the health and education outcomes of women. And they are looking at the adolescents and young adults in Zimbabwe. I agree with the team that the results of this study are going to be helpful to the Zimbabwean government as it crafts its policies that will strengthen and transform the capacity of women in various ways so as to be resilient to the effects of climatic shocks or the impacts of climate change. I have very, very general comments as regards to their paper or to their proposal. When the presenter was presenting, he highlighted and explained very well the outcome variables as well as the explanatory variables that they are interested to consider in this research. And he continued to make reference to the term climatic shocks as one of the central variables that they are going to check out. And when I looked into the proposal, I realized that this climatic shock will be captured in terms of rainfall and temperature. And they indicated that this will only be from the month where the interviews were conducted. So my worry is that most of the agricultural crops in Malawi, they take time to mature. It takes almost a season for them to mature, and we know that a lot can happen within a season in terms of rainfall and temperature. So I would love if the team can consider the seasonal data as they estimate the shocks from rainfall as well as that can emanate from the variations in temperature, rather than just taking data from the month the interviews were conducted. And I agree with the team that it is good to check on the distribution of rainfall, and they should also take maybe into account the rainfall amount, because we can have good rainfall amount in a season with poor distribution. And we can have maybe good distribution, but for amounts for a particular crop. And they made reference to maize and other agricultural crops. So I just took maize as my reference point. Another broad comment that I have maybe for the team, yes, their paper or their proposal is talking about estimating the climate-related shocks on education and healthy outcomes of women, and they have presented, and even in their proposal, they said this will be done using several equations. And as they were talking of the women empowerment, I saw it that they are only looking at the empowerment indicators at household level, as to whether the woman is able to make decisions in the house or not in various areas. So it would be good if they can look at this women empowerment as well by taking into account variables like access to information, maybe participating in activities, participating in the labor market, and any other variables that can convincingly prove to us that indeed these women are empowered or there's something that is lacking. So I feel these are also important variables that or factors that the team can consider exploring and incorporating in their proposal. Furthermore, the team has highlighted some healthy outcomes of which I agree with them, like early fertility, the pregnancy wantedness, as well as the HIV-related knowledge and the other healthy outcomes they have mentioned. However, I feel that the team can also consider a maternal mortality rate as one of the healthy outcomes because it's the rates are relatively higher in Africa, and I feel this is one of the outcomes that can contribute greatly to their research work. Moving forward, I feel like, yes, the team is looking at education and healthy outcomes of women, and they are linking it to climate shocks. But I think there's need to also look at the role of the Zimbabwean Land Acquisition Act and how it has influenced the adaptation to climatic shocks by women, because if they may correct me if I'm wrong, this act states that the government can acquire land as it so fit, even if it pays the owners of the land or it compensates them, but it can acquire land. So if the land security issues are not that stable, you find that most households might not invest in long-term maybe adaptation strategies to climatic shocks. And as they are linking to climatic shock, which at the end of the day will make reference to agricultural production, which comes from the land, I feel the Land Acquisition Act should also be considered in their analysis. It can come in as maybe a shift in the policies that can have an impact in the long-term effects of these climatic shocks on human capital of women. The other thing on policy, I'm glad that they included it in, yes.
My apologies for interrupting. Maybe just a couple of more comments just so we stay on time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I've only 2 more and I'll be quick. Okay, so the research, it's good. They have included the education policy, the healthy policy in their presentation, which is missing in their proposal. So maybe on policy context and needs in their proposal, they should also indicate that. We only saw the one on food policy and agriculture. And lastly, the period of their last observation is 2015, and they are talking of long-term effects or long-term impact of climatic shock on human capital accumulation. I feel it would be good if they can also predict the long-term impact of climatic shock on human capital accumulation. So if they can have an equation on that, it will add more value to their paper. Thank you so much, and good luck, Team Zimbabwe.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ruth. Okay, Luca, over to you for your comments and questions. Thank you.
Yes, just can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. Just let me. Okay, should start. So sharing the full screen. My PowerPoint blocked. Start again. Sorry for that.
Do I need to?
I don't know. No, it's my side. I'm very sorry for that.
Okay.
It's on my side. It's my PowerPoint. I don't know when I. Oh, sorry for that. No, I have a problem with sorry, just will not. Okay, so let me. Then I will not project the full screen because otherwise it continues to block. Sorry for that. So let me start showing this. I'm very sorry for this. Okay, can you see? Okay. So thank you very much for the team, for the presentation, for the proposal. I really enjoyed it. So let me just I select a few comments that I have. First, motivations. So as has been said, just to put this in clear, so the motivations are studying the long-term effects of climate shocks on health and education outcomes among adolescents and young adults in Zimbabwe. Then assessing the mitigating effect of existing cultural norms, and then assessing the mitigating effect of two policies. So the rural electrification program, which has been set up in 2002, and then the food and nutrition security policy in 2013. Then let me go to the outcomes. So first, definition. I had a few problems with with understanding well the definition of outcomes. So it has been said that the age for age zeta scores is one of the main outcomes. But then I'm not sure to understand well, because then at some point it is said that you are actually supposed to use the height, which is probably more consistent with what we know. At least to my knowledge, I know that the height for age zeta scores are only collected. I mean, we can only define them, construct them for younger children, so children below 5, not for adults or adolescents. So why not use then height or body mass index or other related indicators, so more accurate for adults? Then the HIV related knowledge, I'm not sure to understand how climate shocks then would affect it. So for the other outcomes, even if it is not very well explained, but the literature is quite already vast on this. So we know which are potential mechanisms, underlying mechanism, but not really, at least for my knowledge, for the HIV related knowledge. Then the timing. Here really I had hard times to understand the time of the effects of the relationship between the climate shocks and the outcomes. And in the specification, they are measured at time t, so the same time unit of the shock. However, most of the outcomes are cumulative or past events, such as number of years of completed schooling or likelihood of completing secondary school. So I think you should clarify more on this. So if you have a climate shocks as time t, as you seem to define in your specification and your baseline, then your outcomes cannot really be measured at the same time, especially because my understanding is that the main mechanism are actually the negative effects occur at a very early stage of life. so more cumulative or past events. Then cultural norms. So I was expecting a short discussion on heterogeneity in cultural norms in Zimbabwe. So I have no idea what is going on in Zimbabwe. So I think at some point you mentioned that it's mostly a patriarchal society. But if you then want to exploit more that eventual mediating effects, positive or negative, then you should at least present a little bit of discussion in terms of heterogeneity, because if you have no heterogeneity within the country, then you cannot really capture that eventual effects. Then in terms of their definition, so first they are proxied, the cultural norms are proxied by female empowerment within a household. And they are then defined at the individual level. However, we know that cultural norms at the house or community level are expected to play a stronger role, especially given that they identify the impact pathways that you presented or you seem to mention. Then, as you said, the way you define cultural norms or proxy for cultural norms are really strongly endogenous, and the way you instrument I'm not yet convinced. So I would rather suggest, also related to the first comment, to use other more common variables to identify cultural norms. So typically in studies identifying the mediating effects of cultural norms, marriage customs, etc., we normally use ancestral norms such as patrilocality or matrilocality, patrilineage, etc. So we have a few of them. And then the main sources in this case are the ethnographic atlas that can be matched with the DHS through spoken language or ethnic groups. But again, I don't know the heterogeneity in cultural norms in Zimbabwe. So is there enough variability in these variables? I don't know. Another probably even more precise source is the census. So even if you have not, I mean, you can use just one census or two censuses. We know that such norms do not really vary rapidly over time. So you can simply assume that you take one census and then use what's happening. So you define you try then to identify some proxy at the communes or similar units level, and then you can match with your DHS. And then note that these variables are also useful, or I would say necessary controls for a convincing identification strategy, because then the mediating effect of the cultural norm of interest might be correlated with other cultural norms. Then very, very quickly, sorry, and then I encourage to use the SPEI index, as it addresses the issue of potential omitted climate variables. So I know that you mentioned it, but also another one. So I would really suggest that you stay with it. Then again, the timing of measurement. So yeah, this is a key issue to me. Then I will discuss during the individual meetings or other details. Then identification, baseline strategy is basically fine. However, there is the issue of timing of outcomes versus shocks. So it's not clear, and I do not, at least in the way this is presented, I do not really agree. Then serial correlation is corrected. However, you do not really mention at all how you intend to correct for special correlation. So there are a few methods in the related literature that can be taken considered. And then at some point you mentioned household fixed effects. However, at least my understanding is that you have not them. And then the identification of the mediating role of cultural norms. Again, I've already discussed a little bit of this, but it's an issue for your identification of the mediating role of cultural norms. Then, very last word and then I will stop. Policy variables. So I was so happy in the introduction of the proposal to read about the intention to use two key variables, and I fully agree. I mean, the motivation that you provided was convincing, and I was happy for that. However, then these two variables disappeared. So there is no mention both in the empirical strategy, either in the data section. So I'm just wondering why, and I would really push you to use them because I mean there are really policy relevant variables that would really enrich your project. That's all. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Makate. Thank you, Luca and Ruth, for your comments and questions. Just in the interest of time, we won't take the questions in the chat, but I will direct your attention to them just for some further thought as you prepare or finalize your proposal. So we'll move to the second session now. So I'd like to invite Grace Tione to present her proposal on climate shocks and decision-making among smallholder farm households in Malawi, and asking, do gender roles influence adaptation? Grace is a researcher and a part-time lecturer in the Department of Agricultural and Applied Economics at Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources in Malawi. She has a master's degree in agricultural and applied economics and a BSc degree in agribusiness management. Grace has 3 years of experience in research, especially working with Malawi data. Grace, please go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now link to the presentation. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so my name is Grace Tione. I'll be presenting in place of the Malawi team. The title of the proposal is Climate Shocks and Decision-Making Amongst Smallholder Farm Households in Malawi. Do gender roles influence adaptation and mitigation strategies? To climatic shocks. So the team is led by Dr. Ruth Magresdom as a researcher, Rosemary Chiembege. So we have government officials like Edith and Zamiwe. So the presentation will cover the motivation and the policy linkage to this study, but also the research questions and the objective, including the policy question that we are proposing, the data and the methodology that we are proposing, descriptive statistics currently using the data that we are proposing, and the expected policy implication that we want to see at the end of the research. So in terms of the background to the research, climate shock remains to be a major hazard to smallholder farmers in Sub-Saharan Africa, including Malawi. And the climate shock have exacerbated the production because of, one, the heavy reliance on red feed, especially for Malawi. And most of the farmers are subsistence farming with a marginalized land, and they are producing just enough for consumption with little surplus to the market. They also have higher poverty levels. They do not have enough to support themselves throughout the year. So these factors have resulted in most of the smallholder farmers depending more on the government for support because of the climatic shocks that they cannot support to provide for themselves. But coupled to that, Powell indicated that at the national level, climate shock contributes to a GDP loss, where the study indicated that on an average, Malawi loses a 1.7% loss in GDP annually due to drought and floods. So with that, it is important for Malawi in the agricultural base to understand how best we can mitigate such climatic shocks, but also how can we disaggregate the gender impact of those climatic shocks to the farm households. So Malawi being an agro-based economy, the agriculture sector employs 76% to the total employment, out of which 80% are women. Therefore, the role of women in the agriculture sector is important if we are to understand the mitigation and adaptation measures to climate change. But also the national climate change policy, it emphasizes that climate shock has a balance and not understand more on could apply. So we understand that there have been studies that have linked gender to adaptation potentials, but now our contribution to the literature is that we are bringing in the time dimension in which the past literatures were not looking. For example, COSA looked at the impact of the gender disaggregation in climate smart agriculture practices, but they used only cross-sectional data. So our contribution is the time variant to say, we are shocked that happens today, it has a bearing on the next year's livelihood. How are they going to shock based on how are they going to cope based on the shock that they have? But also we are contributing to the mitigation factors. We want to understand what are the mitigation factors in a gender disaggregated manner, but also we are going beyond the climate smart agriculture practices. So the objective of this proposal is that we want to the gender disparities in the decision making on climate. But the overall research question is that what making on climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies in Malawi. But then on the specifically, to what extent do the climate shock affect livelihood of the male and female headed households across the time and space? And also, do gender decision dynamics exist among a small farm households in terms of the adaptation to climate change and the mitigation? But also, what are the gender dynamic differences that are there when farmers want to mitigate to the climate change? So with that, the policy questions that we want to answer, what strategies can we derive out of this research or this project that can reduce the gender disparities that exist in decision making on climate change? But also we want to look at how can the effect of climate shock. One thing to note is that currently Malawi is reviewing the gender policy. So whatever the results from this could support to understand better on how they can improve the gender policy to include the issues of climate shock mitigation and adaptation policies. So in terms of the decision-making mechanism, we understand that a farmer is subjected to shocks. These shocks are external to the farmer because they do not have control to it. Therefore, the climatic shock affects the farmer at a household and a person. For example, the gender norms, understanding or disaggregating that a male farmer will make decisions that will be different from a male-headed farmer. But also we have socio-economic and institutional factors that affect the decision that has to be made. So at a household level, that decision will help them to adapt and mitigate. But that decision is also linked to their livelihood. How do they use the livelihood aspects to mitigate to the shock that is there? That's why we have a double arrow to the climate change and also the livelihood. But we also know that the climate shock also affects the livelihood of the farm households. So this was conceptually the idea that we have, that if we are to understand the decision making at a household level, then we'll be able to disaggregate the adaptation and mitigation strategies that are for male-headed households and for female-headed households. So in terms of the potential determinants and impacts, we know that there is a potential determinants at a household level, that a farmer, if he wants to mitigate, there is an issue of financial aspect, there's an issue of knowledge, and the strategies that are likely available to the farmer for that farmer to make a decision. But also we have the stakeholder level, the political will, the financial capacity to support that farmer. So we are saying these aspects, if they are readily available, they could support either a male-headed household or a female-headed household in terms of adapting and coping to such shocks. But also we know that there are causal mechanisms that in our case, we know that a shock happens 1 year. That shock has a triple effect to the coming years. So whatever the decision that the farmer takes, it has a bearing of the livelihood aspects in the following year. So in our study, we want to look at the panel data, where as a debate mitigation choices, but for the independent variables, we'll be looking at socioeconomic variables in which we'll be able to link to say, what are the existing mitigating strategies that are adopted by time? Are they changing? What are the factors that are influencing to that? So in terms of defining our gender variable, we would define the gender variable at a household level, depending on our data, meaning a female-headed household and a male-headed household. What are the adaptation and mitigation strategies that they are doing? The analysis will use the variable of either a sole decision maker or a decision that is incorporating other household members. In terms of mitigation, we'll be using understanding the adaptation and mitigation strategies that is disaggregated by gender. So in terms of our methodology, we'll be estimating a multivariate probability model where we have Y, I, T, M, where I is the household, T is the time, and M are the mitigation strategies that are the mitigation and adaptation strategies. B are the coefficient, the estimated coefficients, and XD are the social and institutional variables. We know that the mitigation and adaptation strategies are a lot, so we cannot use the probit because of the multiple shocks and the mitigation strategies. So instead of just using the probit, we'll use the multivariate probit for that. But we also know that there can be an issue of selection bias and missing observations, in which we'll try to control and understand better on how we can manage the biases that could be there. Apart from that, we also use the Horstman test to test for selectivity bias. In terms of estimating the effect of the climatic shock to the livelihood outcome, we are basing this model to say that a shock that happens in one period, it has a triple effect in the other year. That's why we have YJT minus YJT minus 1. That means whatever the coping strategies that they used in the previous year, it will have an effect to the livelihood index that they have in the current year. Meaning to say that if a farmer was affected by, for example, flood, maybe they use part of their own saving to cope for that. That means the savings for the next year will be lesser than the money that they have removed out of it. So with that, we will use the X's as our socioeconomic and community characteristics, the Z here as our vector of shock-related characteristics, and then the gender dummy to mean what are the strategies that are more adopted by the female-headed households and the male-headed households, with the E as our error. So in this model, we use the first difference to understand better on how the time factor can be included in terms of the livelihood index. So in terms of the data that is being proposed, we use the living standard measurement panel data for 3 waves, 2013, 2016, and 2019. We're using the 3 waves in terms of the short-term analysis and the long-term analysis. Meaning a shock happens in 2013, how are they coping? And what are the strategies that they are more using in 2016? And in a long line from 2013 to 2019, what has been the disparities and the changes? But with that, we should also include the political differences and some of the government support systems that have been there, which will be incorporated to understand what are the coping and the mitigation strategies. But it is also worth it to note that the gender policy ended in 2018. Therefore, the new gender policy, how is it going to help to understand the challenges that the female farmers are faced with climate change and how best can they mitigate to that. So the sample for 2013 is 1,190. For 2016, 2,508, 2019, 2,339. This is the sample that that is there in terms of the IHPS data. And in terms of attrition, for 2016 was 4% attrition, for 2019, 5.6 attrition. So for a simple depiction of the data that we have, in terms of the gender of the household head for the years that we have, we find that 23% of the sampled households were female-headed farmers, which was not different across the time, less than 30%. But it is important to understand the bottom variable, the sole decision maker. So in the IHS data, they were asking who is the decision maker of all the crops decision in the household. So we find that 57% indicated that they are sole decision maker. So if a household is female-headed household, that means part of it, the female is the sole decision maker in making either the mitigation and the adaptation measures. If that household is the male-headed household, that means there's a higher percentage that the household head makes the decision. That's why we are saying we can use the sex of the household head as our disaggregation in terms of gender. But apart from that, agriculture is rural-based. That's why you have a higher percentage of the farming households in rural area, with the mean household of 5 across the time, and an average age of 43, with a higher dependency ratio. So the bracket on the dependency ratio is at a national level. So it is also important to understand that Malawi is a youthful population, which is more dependent on the working class. So it also has a bearing on the mitigation and adaptation strategies that the household use. So in terms of climatic shocks faced in Malawi, the data records a perceived understanding of the shock that affected the households. So in 2013, you find that drought, the farmers who reported that they had an effect of drought, they were only 32%, compared to 50% to 15% for flood, and then 50% for irregular rain. So the blue indicates 2013, the shocks that were there. The orange indicates for 2016, and the gray is for 2019. So it is important to note that in 2013, the biggest shock was drought for 2016, and then irregular rain for 2016. But in 2019, pest attack was the biggest shock. So these are the shocks that affects the farmers. Now we have to understand, how do the farmers cope and adapt to those shocks? So in the adaptation strategies, the data also incorporates with the strategies that the farmers are currently using. So I find that the higher percentage is that the farmers will use their own resources to mitigate or to adapt to that shock. As such, we find that in the next year, they will have less savings for them to manage the household. And if a shock happens, that means the own savings, they tend to deteriorate, putting the farmers in a higher levels of poverty. But also that there is government support, which is at least smaller, 2% or 3% in 2019, and the involuntary dietary change, which is also high for especially the 2013. So we want to understand these ones and disaggregate by gender, that which are the scoping strategies that are female-based or females, they are more utilizing than the male-headed households. In terms of mitigation, most of the farmers indicated they just use traditional ridging, but some indicated tide or box ridging as a mitigating strategies in terms of the crop production. We are specifically looking at the crop production because Malawi is an agro-based, and most of the rural farmers, they rely on agriculture. As that, if they mitigate in the agriculture based, more harvest in which they can increase their income base or livelihood base. Also that there is an issue of controlling erosion, planting trees, water harvest bans, which are small in terms of the adoption percent. We tend to ask in terms of gender, which one is more adopted. Implication policy for us is once we understand the mitigation strategies that are gender-based, we would be able to designing best the tailor-made interventions that targets the disadvantaged group. So in integrating the gender into the planning and development is crucial if we are to adapt to the climate change, which it's still we are still occurring, and it's not going to change the next year. But also it's important to effectively manage the adverse effects of new policies. How can we, in fact, the Malawi government is currently reviewing, because it will have a bearing, or it will have an insight to say, if we are to put the how can those disadvantaged groups or agro-based economy, but ecological resilience of both male and female compositions? We have Dr. Ruth Magreda, who is the team leader. She'll be the overseer of the whole project and also support in the technical writing report and also the manuscript. Myself, I have experience on the HPS data handling and report writing. We have Wisdom Gomezuru as also a fellow researcher with a vast experience in data management and analysis and report writing. We have Rosemary Bota, who is a specialist in also data analysis, literature review, and reporting. And Chiembekeza Chafua, also excellent in data management, reporting, and example, in terms of data management, but with who is the government for our part, who support us to tell a policy, policy suggestions that can be adopted by Ministry of Gender. But also we have Samuel doing the sender policies strategies that we can use as a
wonderful. Thank you so much, Grace. I apologize. I think we had a bit of trouble with your connection, or perhaps that was just me, but thank you for that great presentation.
Sorry, my network went off. I apologize for that.
No, that's absolutely fine. It was great to have your slides there so we could follow along with you.
All
okay.
right.
So great. So I'll turn it over to our discussants now. So our first discussant this morning was supposed to be Michael Nadanchow, but unfortunately he cannot be with us today. So I will hand it over to Brenda Nyambo. Sorry, I'm just pulling up Brenda's bio. So Brenda is a master's student at the University of Dar es Salaam. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in economics and statistics from the University of Dar es Salaam. She's currently at the master's dissertation stage, researching the nexus between foreign direct investment, economic growth and employment, a case of Tanzania. Brenda also holds a bachelor's degree in economics and statistics from the University of Dar es Salaam. Her research interests span the areas of development economics, labor economics, monetary economics, and macroeconomics. And then following Brenda's comments, we will have Francesca Marchetta. Francesca is a PEP resource person. After obtaining her PhD in development economics at the University of Florence in 2008, Francesca was a Jean Monnet postdoc fellow at the European University Institute. From November 2010 to November 2012, she was a postdoc at CERDI, University of Auvergne, where she is now an assistant professor. Her main area of research interest is human development, with a special focus on economic migration, education, labor market, and gender issues. Okay, so Brenda, I'll invite you to relay Michael's comments. Thank you.
Thank you everyone. Thank you, Graciane, for a nice presentation. I will share my screen and show you the comments and take you through there. I hope all you can see the comments and you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. The proposal, the current proposal was to explore the following: the gender disparities, climatic shocks, gender roles. Also, however, Professor had few observations on the proposal. First, the researchers are not forthcoming on what gender-related decision is and what are related influence on strategies. I guess the reader should take advantage of seeing the likely variables of policy interest and outcomes out of the proposed research. It could favor the reader to see the advantage. And also, on the research question number 2, it says it is climatic shocks are known, hence the research question is not stated as a research question. Instead, it should be restated to capture what are the effects of climatic shocks on livelihood of the female and male-headed rural households. Also, it is notable that in section 1.1 and 1.2 does not have a good background for research question. For the research question 2, as stated, the question suggests the analysis is to be comparative. The comparison of the adoption or outcome from the CSA on female and male-headed household, but the sections are on women only. Okay, coming to another, the statement, of the statement that the study intends to provide evidence across space and time. It sounds a bit confusing. It could be more clarifying what space means in your proposal. What does space really mean in your study context? Are you planning to conduct analysis for each specific community, region, state, or geographical area or district? Another comment is the authors will however test for the presence of unobserved heterogeneity, and this might further guide in the estimation of the model based on the assumptions of the model. In this case, you could specify how will you test for the unobserved heterogeneity? Which alternative estimation methods do you have in mind that could help you address the problem if you reject the null hypothesis? Also, in addition to that, the authors will further test for the optimal lag length of the data. But we know that finding the optimal lag length of the data is a bit tricky, especially when you have a short time span. In your case, you said you're using 2013, 2016, and 19, which is only 3 rounds of the survey. The approach you're planning to use, will it help you to arrive in the in finding the optimal lag length of the data. So I suggest you provide the result with the 1 lag and conduct the robustness with models with 2 lags, which is the farthest you can go with the data you have. Another comment is the current study will define productivity as the value of maize yield using the prevailing maize price per kilogram in the major markets closest to the area per hectare. The ILSM collects information on farmers, self-reported value of the harvested crops, which you can also use. It was a suggestion. Okay. Another thing was about the climatic shock being endogenous in your model. The statement which says, noticing that there exists some unobserved heterogeneity that can affect the presence of climatic shock in a year, does not make climatic shock be endogenous to farmers. The decision to use conservation agriculture can be endogenous in your model. Farmers can predict the long-run trend of weather shock, such as heavy rainfall or temperature, and respond by adapting different coping strategy. But you repeatedly mentioned that you will include other relevant characteristics of shocks as instruments. Which shock characteristics are you referring that can act as instrument for weather shock? Do they meet the exclusion criteria? Probably think about this. Also, how do you measure the weather shock in your study? Quoting this statement, IHPS collected data on climatic shock and natural disaster include drought, irregular rains, floods, landslides, and earthquake. I assume you intend to use self-reported questions in the ILSM to proxy for weather shock. While this approach is also useful, I suggest using more reliable and less biased indicators such as RAI and SPI, especially in your last objective when you intend to provide evidence of the impact of climate change on productivity. Also, in the data section, you stated, we will concentrate on physical climate shocks like floods, higher temperature and dry spell, etc. This makes me think contrary to the previous observation above, that it is not explicitly stated, it's just a guess. Another thing is about the statement that, secondly, the study, first of all, estimate a 2-stage model of factors affecting choice of conservation, agricultural strategies, and then use the predicted values in equation 8. This statement is not clear which model is estimated in 2-stage fashion and which predicted values will be plugged to the equation 8. The first or the second stage values from the model within the conservation agriculture as an outcome. Okay, the instrumental variables, which kind of instrumental variables are you planning to use as instrument for the choice of the conservation agriculture? You could also explain it a bit more. And you plan to control for both income and asset index, wealth or SES indicator in the model. The two variables measure almost the same thing and might subject your model to serious multicollinearity issues. I would suggest you only select one. And lastly, the literature on multiple climate smart agriculture is missing. In your study, despite being one of your key variable of interest. So you could also check for the climate smart agriculture variable. Thank you. I guess this is the end of the.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brenda, and thank you to Dr. Ndensho for his comments. Okay, I will now hand the floor over to Francesca for her comments. Francesca, please go ahead.
Yeah, I cannot share my screen for now because I think that Brenda needs to stop her.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Does it work?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we can see.
Yes.
So thank you, Grace, for your presentation. I enjoyed reading your proposal, and sorry I could not hear you very well.
Apologies, Francesca. Sorry to interrupt you. We're just seeing the presenter view. I'm not sure if we can see the full view, the full screen view.
Sorry, it's like, I don't know, how can you, how can you change this? Like that?
Fortunately, I'm not particularly savvy with PowerPoint. So.
Maybe like that. No. Sorry.
I suggest you proceed like that because I guess that you have two screens.
If you can just click the slideshow, it should be okay. Can you see the slideshow at the bottom?
Yeah, but it doesn't work. I don't know why. Normally, I can. I try again. Again, no. I don't know. Now it doesn't work anymore. So
oh no.
So if I put in slide, yeah, presentation mode, it doesn't work. Look at.
But it looks okay from my end. I can see it myself.
Yeah, but then I wrote small in the next slides. If I maybe because I have two screens, it's better now or not?
Yes, that looks perfect. If you're able to control it, that looks
okay,
good.
maybe it was because of my other screen. Okay, let's try like that. Okay, I need to clarify that my comments are related to the proposal, not on the presentation, because there are several changes, for example, on the research questions and partially on the methodology between the proposal and the presentation. So especially for the ones who did not read the proposal, some of my comments could seem quite strange. So first, the main problem I see in your proposal is a partial incoherence between the research questions and the methodology you propose to reply to those questions. In the abstract, you write, for example, that the research project intends to measure the gender disparities in the decision-making on climate change adaptation strategies in Malawi. Then in the main research question section, you write that it investigates the decision dynamics in adopting climate change mitigating strategies and the impact of gender roles in adopting climate change mitigation strategies. So in reading decision dynamics or the impact of gender roles, I understand that you are going to explore the way the decisions are taken. I thus expected an analysis of intra-household decision-making, so a study on the role of each household member, in particular men and women, inside the household with respect to decision-making on the adaptation strategies to adopt. Also at the end, in the contribution section, you write that no study highlights who makes the decisions to adapt and how the decision-making process changes across space and time. Again, this suggests to me that you are focusing in the project on intra-household decision-making process and its evolution over time. But in fact, in reading the methodological section, I realized that this is not at all the case because you do not look at the intra-household decision making. And the gender heterogeneity, that you propose to explore is limited to the analysis of the differences between male-headed households and female-headed households with respect to the strategies they adopt after weather shock. So more specifically, in your methodological section, you describe that you want to make 3 different analyses. First, using this multivariate probit model, you propose to estimate the probability to adopt a certain number of adaptation strategies. And among the explanatory variables, you only include a vector of socioeconomic, institutional factors and farm characteristics. So here I do not see any gender component unless you want to run the same model for male-headed and female-headed households, but you do not mention it in the text. So you just look at the influence of socioeconomic characteristics on adaptation strategies. Then you propose, so second point, you propose to estimate the effects of climate shocks on livelihood outcomes of rural farm households. So with respect to this, I have first general comments. There is a large literature that exists on that point, and you only briefly mentioned this literature. So I'm not sure that this could be a core part of your contribution. But most important, any gender component is present here in the proposal. I see now in the presentation that you added a gender dummy. It was not there in the proposal. But most important, there is not any decision-making process that is explored in this part. So you simply look at the change in the outcomes when a shock occurred. And finally, in the third analysis, you propose to explain how land productivity is influenced by the adoption of household conservation and agriculture adaptation strategies. So here you finally included the gender component because you add in the model a dummy for the gender that I mean, you said in the presentation that is the gender of the household head, but it was not written in the proposal. So this, you propose to interact this gender dummy with the conservation strategies. So I think that this was the most interesting part of the story because it's quite interesting to explore if the strategies are more or less effective in preventing land productivity decline in male and in female-headed households. But there are huge endogeneity problems that I see there. I'll discuss them in another slide afterward. But first, I see an important problem in the kind of gender heterogeneity that you propose to explore. Because female and male-headed households are different, very different in nature. Usually, in a country like Malawi, when a household is female-headed, is because there is a shock that occurred to the household. Most of the time, husband is dead, or sometimes they divorced, sometimes husband migrated. It is not common in Malawi to have a female-headed household unless one of these situations occurred. So this means that the households are very different. The two types of households are very different, and the differences in the adoption behavior or in the effects of adaptation strategies that you could see between female-headed and male-headed households are likely to be explained by the shock occurrences, not the weather shock, but the shock, like for example, the death of the husband, of the migration of the husband, and not by the different preferences that are that might exist across gender. In other words, if you find that different strategies are adopted in female and male-headed households, or that the strategies that households adopt have different effects across these two types of households, this could be simply explained by the fact that female-headed households experienced some sort of shock, like for example, the death of the husband, and so they are not really comparable. So this is my the main problem that I see in your what you propose. So I have other comments. Some comments on the data, but I think that I skip this because we are we have not much time. We can discuss tomorrow. I will discuss the problem on the methodology. So in the second point, so where you propose to estimate the effects of climate shocks on livelihood outcomes of rural farm households, I do not really understand what you propose. The lack of the clarity can be partially explained by some errors in the text of the proposal. In particular, there are some mathematical expressions that miss. So sorry for that. So this is maybe for that was not so clear. But what I understand is that you want to explain how a shock occurred between time t-1 and time t. So this shock, how it influences the change in the outcome. So you propose to look at several outcomes. So first, I am correct? And do you have only 2 periods here, or do you want to use the 3 waves? It is not clear. And this question was already asked. Why do you consider that your weather shocks are endogenous, and what do you mean with, you say that you want to include shock related characteristics, but it's not clear what are these shock related characteristics. And in the third analysis that you propose, here, I mean, you want to assess how land productivity is affected by the adoption of conservation strategies following a shock. So you are, of course, you want to include in the sample both households that experienced a shock and the households that did not. But of course, the adoption of the conservation strategy is affected by the shocks, and you recognize it at the very end of the section, and you write just a sentence that you want to estimate a 2-stage model, but you do not further explain. I mean, this is really a key point. So you cannot just write a sentence. You need to understand, I mean, to give more detail to understand how you can address this indigeneity problem. And I mean, last comments on the policy relevant, for me, it is not easy to assess because, again, the research objectives are not clearly defined, not coherent with the proposed methodology. So I think that you need to clarify. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Francesca, and thank you, Brenda. And now, just to note, there are a couple of questions in the chat again, and presenters, I welcome you to look at it and respond in the chat if you see fit, but we won't address them right now, just in the interest of time. So now we will move to the third presentation today. So I would like to invite Khadija Busola Amolegbe, and apologies for any pronunciation errors, who will be presenting on household food security status, crop diversification, and rainfall shocks in Nigeria. Khadija earned her PhD in agricultural economics from the University of Ilorin, Nigeria, and currently works as a lecturer and researcher at the same institution. She was a visiting fellow at Cornell University in the United States under the Structural Transformation of African Agriculture and Rural Spaces Fellowship Program. Her interests are in the areas of food security, poverty, labor markets, and agricultural development economics. Khadija, I welcome you to start your presentation.
Good day, everybody. My name is Khadija Busola Amolegbe, and I'm presenting on behalf of Team Nigeria, made up of Rose, Bernadine, Emmanuel, Renee, and Sunday. The title of our presentation is The Gendered Effects of Crop Diversification and Rainfall Shocks on Household Food Security Status in Nigeria. Here is the outline of our presentation for today, and is based on the PEP template sent to us. So, let me jump straight to the presentation. In a way of motivating this research, I would like to give a background on the rainfall shock and food security situation in Nigeria and the role of women in household food security status. As we all know, rainfall shock is a big problem in Sub-Saharan Africa and is of particular policy importance, relevance in Nigeria, because agriculture is mostly rain-fed and the irrigation systems are poor. However, the rainfall shocks affect women disproportionately, and it affects consumption by about 37% because it affects agricultural production in general. Yeah, although households have been able to employ various mitigation and adaptation strategies to reduce the impact of rainfall shocks on households. Many of these mitigation strategies identified in studies have probably focused on the effects on income on households. However, recent studies have identified the use of crop diversification and how it is linked to food security status because it helps household increase crop production and diverse diet and income. However, the crop diversification capability of any household is limited by access to land, inputs, and information. Also, women play an important role in household food security status, and the diversity of women reflect the household economic access to food, because women mainly produce staples for home consumption. However, women are constrained because they hold less than 15% of agricultural land, so they are constrained to diversify. Despite the fact that the productivity of women or female managed plots increases by 22% if they have the same resource access as their male counterparts. So what's the key issue, and why are we interested in this topic? The key issue is that given the role women play in food security, which inclusive intervention can effectively help mitigate the impact of rainfall shocks on household food security. The option we are proposing is an option or an intervention that is targeted at improving the crop diversification capacity of women. So this research is based on providing empirical evidence to justify our policy option. Various policies and various government programs have been targeted at mitigating the effects of rainfall shocks on household food security status in Nigeria. We have the National Agricultural Transformation Agenda, and we have recent follow-up programs like the Agricultural Transformation Agenda Supports Program to address the food security issues in Nigeria. We also have the Agricultural Promotion Policy, which ran from 2016 to 2020, and it is targeted at mitigating the impact of climate change on food security. We also have the Livelihood Improvement Family Enterprise, called LIFE for short, and it ran from 2016 to 2019, and it is targeted at women in particular and to help address the food security problem in the country. However, despite all these programs, about 50% of the Nigerian population are still food insecure. So the big question is, how do we address the food security problem in the face of climate change, given the government effort at addressing rainfall shocks and food insecurity in the past? So our research aims to answer the basic question: what are the gender effects of crop diversification on household food security in the context of rainfall shocks? I will answer the question: does the crop diversification behavior of men and women, or male and female as the case may be, help mitigate rainfall shock effects on household food security differently? The key objective is to assess the gender effects of crop diversification and rainfall shocks on household food security, and we will estimate the effects of rainfall shocks on household food security status. We will also estimate the effects of rainfall shocks on the food security status of men and women-headed, or male or female-headed households. And we'll estimate the inter and intra-household gender effects of crop diversification in mitigating the impact of rainfall shocks on household food security status. This is a pictorial representation of the mechanism of effects. Rainfall shocks affect household. This is based on my background, and which I already explained. That rainfall shock affect households, and it affects women-headed households disproportionately. However, crop diversification helps mitigate the effects of rainfall shocks on household food security. But the crop diversification depends on the crop diversification behavior of the household members, the men and the women within the household, how they deal with the behavior in crop diversification. And the mechanism of effect by which crop diversification helps mitigate food security is impact of rainfall shocks on food security is by increasing crop production, producing diverse crop for consumption, and by producing households with income. So our study is particularly relevant, and it is contributing to literature because there's a diverse and a growing literature in this research area. However, our study will focus on the nexus between rainfall shocks, crop diversification, and household food security setup. Previous studies have particularly focused on non-farm sector, but the focus on non-farm sector brings the risk of reduced agricultural labor and food. We will also focus on the gender effects by varying, looking at the effects on male-headed and female-headed, and looking at the mitigation effects within the household. We'll also focus on the role of women in improving household food security status and looking at inter-household and intra-household crop diversification behavior of households. We'll also use robust data sets, which is rainfall data and comprehensive household data sets. And we are considering more than one measure of relevant variable. For the crop diversification, we are using the index, and we're also using the income share. For the food security status, we'll be focusing on household diversity and reduced coping strategy. And for the rainfall shock, we'll be looking at the historical, which is like a long-term effect of rainfall shock, and the seasonal, which is short-term effect of rainfall shock. We'll also be using the fixed effect regression method to answer our research question, and we'll be carrying out various robustness checks during our research. For the methodology, we'll be using the fixed effect regression method, and this is the key method. Equation 1 is the key regression for our study. We also have other studies looking at the effect of rainfall shocks on household at the aggregate level, then for the female and male-headed household. But for this, we are looking at the mitigating effect of crop diversification, which is the CD, on the PH, which is the food security status, and R represents the rainfall level. And we'll be interchanging this based on the measure will be of interest. For example, for the food security status of household, we'll have the household dietary diversity. We'll run a separate regression for household dietary diversity, and we'll also run a separate regression for reduced coping strategy index. And based on the training we received over the last few days, we are also interested in the gap between men and women-headed household using the OHACA approach. The equation 1 poses various endogeneity problem, and to address this endogeneity problem, we'll be using the GMM instrumental variable approach to address the endogeneity problem by running a separate regression of rainfall shock on the crop diversification behavior of households, and also running a separate regression of crop diversification based on the predicted crop diversification behavior on the food security status of households. For the HDDS, because HDDS is a count variable, we'll also have other robustness check by using multi-index models like ZIP or Poison to test if our analysis remains the same. And for the reduced coping strategy index, because it's an index, we'll use a fractional probit regression model to test if our result remains the same, given that the RCSI is an index. And also because HGDS is mainly a measure of food access or the quantity of food consumed, we are also concerned about the quality of food. So we'll re-estimate our models using only 9 food groups, and we'll remove the 3 energy dense yet less nutritious food from our estimates. But for the data, we'll be using the rainfall data and the household survey data. The rainfall data we are interested in will be sourced from is already sourced from the Nigeria Meteorological Center, and we are considering monthly average rainfall data across the 36 states of the country, plus the Federal Capital Territory from 2009 to 2019. And for the household survey data, we'll be using the World Bank LSMS for Nigeria, and we'll be using the 4 waves, which is in 2009, 2011, 2013, and the recent one in 2018. The household survey data has seasonal variation because data was collected in the post-planting and post-harvest season, so we'll be able to test for seasonal variation in our analysis. And the household consists of 5,000 households, and we'll also be testing for attrition using the inverse probability weighting method, and we can control for attrition if our test gives there's incidence of attrition bias. so control for attrition. So I'll give a breakdown of how we measure each of our relevant variables. To measure the rainfall shock, like I mentioned, we'll be using the historical and the seasonal average. For the historical average, we'll compare rainfall for a particular year in a particular month with rainfall over the period of time. And for the seasonal year, we'll compare adjacent months to get the seasonal average. And we'll assign households with the historical and the seasonal rainfall averages close to them based on their household location and the date of survey interview. To measure crop diversification, we'll be focusing on two measures, which is the income share and the index. The income share is the share of total income derived from each crop cultivated by the household. And we'll also we'll calculate this at the household level and at the individual level. And for the index, we'll also calculate the index at the household level and at the individual level across gender. For the household food security status, the household diversity score will be following the International Dietary Data Expansion method of constructing HDDS, and we will focus on 12 main food groups consumed by household over a period of 7 days. And to interpret the HDDS, higher scores represent that households have greater diversity and improved food security. For the reduced coping strategy index, we'll be following the Maxwell et al. 2018 method, and we'll focus on 5 coping strategies employed by households, and to help assess the strategies employed by households to cope with shock. This has like a reverse interpretation to the HGDS, because higher scores of RCSI represent that households are associated with lower food security or greater hardship. Here's the preliminary results we ran from the data we have. For the rainfall trend, we have presented the historical trend and the seasonal trend. And for the historical trend, we can see that in 2014, the country experienced a fall in rainfall, and there's a sharp rise in rainfall in 2015. The historical trend, the seasonal trend varies the same way across over time, but really varies within a particular year. And with high rainfall in July and reduced rainfall in January. The second table on the right represents the crop diversification by gender, and we have presented for male-headed and female-headed plots the crop yield in male-headed and female-headed household plots. And the crops mainly cultivated by households are cassava, yam, maize, sorghum, millet, rice, groundnut, and cowpea. We also have preliminary results from baseline analysis using the wave 1 data only. And this shows that for the age of the head, the average age is 50 years, but male-headed households are on average older than female-headed households are on average older than male-headed households. And if we look below at the HGDS and the RCSI score, you can see that female-headed households are more food insecure than the male-headed household for both the HGDS and the RCSI results. We also have a preliminary analysis showing the relationship between rainfall shock and food security status. And we can see that the historical shock have negative effects on households overall, on aggregate, with it affecting HDDS by 0.06 units and affecting women-headed households by 0.011 units. So women are more affected. Women-headed households, or female-headed households, are more affected by rainfall shocks than male-headed households. And households are on average more affected by historical shock than seasonal shock, because the seasonal shock does not present any significant results. So the expected policy implication or policy relevance of our study is basically targeting our study keys to the global 2030 agenda for sustainable development in line with SDG 2, which is zero hunger, gender equality, and climate action. Because our study will look at the nexus between food security, crop diversification, and rainfall shock. So results from this study will serve as evidence in achieving the SDG goals. Nigeria also has diverse socioeconomic and climatic conditions, and it's of important relevance in this study. And getting the results will have great impact on the policy environment in Nigeria. We also have active macroeconomic policies that are targeted at helping households achieve food security. The Agricultural Transformation Agenda Support Program, the results of this study will key to the Agricultural Transformation Agenda Support Program, which is targeted at helping households improve their food security status. It will also key, and the result is also key to the National Gender Policy in Agriculture, which was launched in 2019. And there's a recent Gender Steering Committee, which these results will be useful for. The Gender Steering Committee was inaugurated just 2 weeks ago, and the Permanent Secretary of the Federal Ministry of Agriculture stated during this steering committee that the steering committee initiative will promote and ensure the adoption of gender-sensitive responsive approaches, plans, and programs in such a way that men and women will have equal access and control of productive resources. So the results of this study will be very important to the recently inaugurated National Gender Steering Committee. And the results will generally, overall, will be of benefit to stakeholders and the government stakeholders and other NGOs. The team is made up of me, that's Khadijat Molegbe, I'm team leader, and I'll be overseeing the quality and timely delivery of projects. And we also have Eugene, who will contribute in secondary data cleaning, analysis, and reporting of writing of reports. And we have Bernardine that has great econometric experience, and will also help in stakeholder analysis, literature review, and policy brief writing. We have Emmanuel that will contribute to data analysis, discussion of results, preparation of reports. We have Rene, the government stakeholder, and will really help in stakeholder consultation and also support in data analysis and workshop organization. Sunday is also a government stakeholder, and it will help in stakeholder consultation, discussion of results, preparation of reports. We also have our substitute researchers that are present in the audience today. I couldn't fit them in on the slide, but they are present in the audience, and they have been supporting the project since they were selected as substitute researchers. We have Okoyemi and we have Sergio. So the team will basically benefit from this research because the proposal will help develop our research skills, policy engagement skills, and our communication. And we also have master's students here that are interested in going for PhD, and we have current PhD students that will greatly benefit from this research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khadija. I'll just turn on my video again. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I'll now hand it over to our discussants for this session. So first, I'd like to invite Mulugadi Mojapelo. Mulugadi holds a Master of Commerce Economics from the University of Witwatersrand. She is currently a treasurer at the Power Back Mogul GBV movement, and her duties are financial planning, expenditure review, and management of funds. And I'll also invite Abdelkrim Arar, who is a resource person. He obtained, a PEP resource person. He obtained a bachelor's degree in economics and finance from the University of Algiers, a master's degree in economics from the University of Sherbrooke with a mention of excellence, and a PhD in economics at Laval University. Abdelkrim has been involved in designing and conducting training activities, developing training material, conducting fundamental research, providing distance support, and mentoring many PEP projects. Many of his papers have also been published in international journals. So Mulugadi, I'll invite you to go first. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you guys can see my screen. Can you please confirm?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So for the sake of time, I will just summarize the key points that I have. The first concern that I had with the proposal is that they gave us a background focusing on Sub-Saharan Africa rather than Nigeria. So for their study, we need more background on that. They should also provide us with training so that their identification strategy can be solid. And then major concerns were in their methodology, whereby their method is actually prone to variable omission bias because they only control for rainfall but do not cater for temperatures. We know that food consumption patterns respond more to temperature changes rather than rainfall. So a remedy to that would just be that they should cater for both rainfall and temperature shocks. Another thing is that they did not give us background information that support their hypothesis that women are more vulnerable to climate shocks than men in Nigeria. So they should try to build up on their background regarding Nigeria only, not Sub-Saharan Africa. Another concern would be from their equation 5, whereby they considered historical mean rainfall as a test variable, but from their proposal, they emphasized rainfall shocks. So I would say that values for rainfall are a good measure for rainfall conditions over time, but they are not a good measure for rainfall shocks. So they should review that as well. And then another problem is regarding indigeneity in their model. So they mentioned that, they used crop diversification as a decision variable, and which is endogenous, but they come back talking about exogenous variation, which is wrong. Their instruments are not valid for this model, so I'd advise that they review that as well. With regards to the equation 5 again, I can give them a remedy whereby, let me just scroll down for you. One of the remedies would be that they should simply measure the percent deviations of rainfall in particular seasons, which are covered in the LSMS data for Nigeria. So moving to their robustness checks, the authors used instrumental variables regression as a robustness check, but crop diversification is an endogenous variable and would make sense if the researchers prioritize dealing with indigeneity in their study. And then another thing is that from equation 5 again, the authors expect rainfall to have a direct effect on household food security, but then at the same time, they expect crop diversification and rainfall to have direct effects on food security. So for us to have a valid instrument variable, they should satisfy 2 requirements, that is exogeneity, which would require rainfall to influence food security only through its influence on crop diversification. And the instrument should also be relevant in such case that it should be sufficient correlation between rainfall and diversification. I'm just trying to summarize the points that I have here. So overall, the proposal was very recent. They provided some good empirical evidence and literature, but I think they should also include land size ownership by gender so that we see how women interact in their land communities. This will also help them in supporting their hypothesis, proving their hypothesis that women are more vulnerable than men. Yeah, thank you very much. And these are some of the references that I think they should include in their paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mulugadi, and thank you so much for keeping so close to time, recognizing that we are over time for this part of the session. So I'll now invite Abdelkarim to share comments as well. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to follow this presentation. Thank you for the presenter. So, okay, first, in general, I would like to congratulate the team for their valuable effort to produce this revised proposal, which I find promising. The comments that follow aim to continue to improve this work. The authors did not indicate in clear to what refer the rainfall shock. It seems that they confound between two things, levels and shocks. Maybe this can be corrected just by maybe explaining better to the reader or to review this in clear. If you want to refer to shocks, so it is different from the levels. Also, it is suggested to consult the paper of Muharrem again, Mulu Barhan, excuse me, again, which define well the rainfall shocks. Also for the climate shocks, why only we are interested by the rainfall levels or rainfall shocks? We can find for the climate shocks, we can find also irregular rainfall, temperature shocks, etc. So there are a lot of climate shocks or different kind of climate shocks. Why the rainfall shocks are the most important? Can one also check what are the more important kind of rainfall, excuse me, of climate shocks that may impact largely the crops or the production of crops or the outcome in general. Even if the authors have done a valuable effort to adopt more appropriate econometric models in order to analyze the different impacts, particularly nothing is done for the gender issue. So in the introduction of this proposal, they claim that they will cover the gender issues, but later no. In the presentation, they indicate that they will maybe use the Oaxaca blender model. I have to review this before taking any comment. The author should propose also a set of rigorous quantitative methods to check their hypothesis on the different expected impact of crops diversity. Okay, so it is the same thing. Further introduction of the theoretical model, the authors must better explain each of their hypotheses. So, for instance, they claim that the impact of crop diversification will impact more female, but why? No theoretical or even explanation in some words is added by them. If we review also questions 4 and 6, the main equation of the model, it seems that the model did not control for the fixed effect of climate zones. But I remark that they have added this in the presentation. So yeah, climate zones must be controlled. For the potential different biases of the model are not well theoretically introduced. For instance, it is suggested to the authors to give some examples and discuss on how some observable variants can jointly affect crops diversity, decision, and food security. So, yeah, we can say that some observables affect, but at least even if the variables or the variants are not measured, they at least can be presented or introduced in some words. Also, the authors suggest the use of the fixed effect model. Thus, the captured effect in equation 6 assumes that the treatment or the joint event, crops and diversity, varies over time. what happened if this joint effect, in which we will try to capture its impact, if it arrives for many periods or for all of the periods. In this case, maybe with the fixed effect model, we lose the impact, or the impact start to be vanished if the treatment is not random across the periods. Also, for what we can call time lag in the available panel. So, since the survey or the panel is collected in 2010, 12, 15, and 18, this gives to us a time lag of 3 years. So what can be the implication of this time lags? Also, this comment is for practically the rest of the presentations. So assume that we have waves, yearly waves, monthly waves, 3 yearly waves. What can be the optimal time lag? This sure will be depend on what we call the study case. What, for instance, if the adjustment to change crops require 1 year, so the time lag, the optimal time lag will be 1 year, not 3 years. So discuss the application at least. The suggested use of 3 lags of endogenous variable will reduce the panel estimation to only 1 wave. So the authors also in one part indicate that they will use 3 lags, but if they use 3 lags, sure, the sample will be reduced because we lose observation with the used lags. Also, for the GMM, EVGMM, or the general moment model. So the general moment model, yeah, it is efficient to correct the standard errors and also thus correct or unable to do accurate statistical tests to validate the instrumental variables. But this GMM is better just for to correct for the heteroscedasticity. But if we have clustering bias, we have to deal with this with other things. So the authors must explain what kind of bias we can correct with the GMM, and what we have to do to continue to correct biases and to produce better standard errors to perform the tests and to validate the instrumental variables. For this, I suggest to review the work of Bohm 2003, in which he discussed this in clear. Also, maybe the authors can consider what we call the dynamic panel model, in which the endogeneity is controlled by the differential impact, or the differential approach, in which by subtracting the outcome of the last year from this year, we remove the ontogeneity problem. Yes, this is what we advance, but it must be checked. So thank you for the authors, and thank you for following me. Thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the presenters and all of the discussants for this part of the session. I mean, we are 10 minutes over time, but considering how much ground we covered and the depth and engagement of the presentations, it was really wonderful to be a part of this. So thank you to PEP, and thank you to the presenters and discussants. I believe, unless PEP corrects me, I believe we are headed into a 5-minute break, and then Dominique Dewal will take over chairing. So thank you again for having me, and congratulations to all of the presenters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carly. Thanks.
la situation s'il vous plaît, vous avez pu le contacter. Vous avez pu contacter Ibrahim, puisqu'on va entrer dans une réunion.
Bonjour. Je pense qu'on va commencer la seconde session. Oh, sorry, I'm speaking in French. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the second session today. First, let me, for those of you joining just now, let me go and say a few housekeeping things. So we're recording the session. You will receive links to watch your sessions after the annual conference is concluded. Cameras and microphones, please, while you're not speaking, please make sure your microphone is turned off, and you're welcome to keep your camera on. While we are presenting, please turn your camera on. If your connection permits, I'm going to invite the discussants to turn on their cameras and microphones to give their comments. If there is time, we'll take questions. As we are already a bit late, I think it's better if you write your questions in the chat box. Also, there's French and English interpretation available. To listen to your preferred language, click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and then select the language you wish to hear. Nous disposons des services d'interprétation en français et en anglais. Pour écouter ce webinaire dans la langue de votre choix, cliquez sur le bouton interprétation en bas de votre écran. Sélectionnez ensuite la langue que vous souhaitez entendre. Today's first session is on Tanzania. It's the title is Adoption of Multiple Climate Smart Agriculture Practices, Study on Gender Welfare Gap and Policy Options for Women Empowerment in Tanzania. The presenter is Mkupete Ja. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Statistics, as well as a Master's in Economics from the University of Dar es Salaam. He is currently pursuing a PhD in Economics at Stellenbosch University. His thesis focuses on exploring the link between agriculture production, food price shocks, child nutrition, and inequality of opportunity in Tanzania using the standard quasi-experimental econometric technique and machine learning for land use classification. His main research interest is on applied microeconometrics, spatial econometrics, development, and health economics. Okay, so, Mkupete, would you like to start?
Thank you. Let me try to share my screen. Okay, now the problem is why is it not going to pick the file? No. Sorry, I have some difficulties here to pick my file. Let me try. Oh, what? Okay. Yeah, it's coming now.
So can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, cool, thanks. Okay, thank you very much. Already introduced me. My name is Mpetija. So I'll be presenting our project proposal on adoption of multiple climate smart agriculture practices, study on gender welfare gap and the policy option for women empowerment in Tanzania. Our group composed of the member listed above, led by Professor Michael Ndashao and myself, and there is Brenda Nyando, Salome Vumilia, and the Dr. Hangro. So I'll quickly move to the context of the study. So as in other developing countries where women constituted a large share of the labor force in agriculture, in Tanzania also like 90% of women are employed in agriculture. And there is a lot of concern nowadays in the literature, and there is a lot of evidence that's showing that women plots are less productive than male managed plots. And also the weather now, the effect of climate change exacerbates this impact, of which women, it falls more on women than on men, because women are less likely to adopt some mitigation strategies due to some other constraints, partly being cultural norms and in access to resources, which make them now more vulnerable than men when it comes to climate shocks. And in recently, there is increasing concern of adopting agriculture, climate smart agriculture to reduce or minimize the impact of climate shock. And evidence shows that they have some impact on productivity and also can increase the food security of the household. And the gender, and there is anecdotal evidence that implementation of the multiple climate agriculture practices, when if consider gender, they might be able to help to reduce the gender gap in productivity between male and female. So in Tanzania, we actually have policies that relate to environment, but specifically for climate agriculture, there are two, which one is Agriculture Climate Resilience Plan of 2014 to 2019. This policy actually outlines the agriculture sector specific responses measures to climate change. And we also have the guidelines, which was launched in 2017 and expected to end in 2025, which is streamline community specific needs to improve adoption. But our review, after our review of these policies and guidelines, we noticed that there is no clear layout of strategies and priority areas of focus to engage women to increase the adoption of CSA. And also, this policy and guideline is less informed by context-specific evidence-based evaluation studies, because there is no like national representative studies, which actually focuses on multiple climate smart agriculture practices. So in this project now, we are proposing, or we are intending now to provide some evidence which can inform this policy in Tanzania. So we have the following objectives that as can be displayed on the screen. The first, we want to establish the gender gap in adoption of climate smart agriculture. And also we want to identify which women empowerment domain better predict climate smart agriculture practices, adoption decision. And second, we want to estimate the welfare gain in empowering women to adopt climate smart agriculture practices in Tanzania. And lastly, we want to establish or estimate the gender differentiated impact of multiple climate smart agriculture adoption on agriculture productivity and food security. So we expect that by increasing adoption of climate smart agriculture practices, it will lead to higher productivity, which will lead to higher food security, and it will reduce vulnerability of female-headed household to shock, because there is a lot of evidence which is showing that female-headed households are vulnerable to different shocks, including price shocks. So by increasing multiple climate agriculture and increasing productivity, these issues of the vulnerability of female-headed household can reduce. But also, we expect that women can also one of the mechanisms is to increasing urgency in women or bargaining power. So in this case, women can have more decision in production and access to productive resource once we identify the key variables or empowerment dimensions that can enable women to adapt climate smart agriculture and actually increase the yield in their production activities. So how do we measure climate smart agriculture practices? So in our case, we identified like three.
Can I interrupt? Just can you switch to slide view? Sorry, I should have said this earlier. Thank you.
All right, cool. Now it's clear. All right, thank you very much. Oh, so now we have identified 3 climate smart agriculture practices, which is crop rotation, improved varieties, and water management. So we assume that household can adopt either of these or multiple, one of these or a combination of these. So in that case, by interacting these multiple climate agriculture practices, we end up with 8 possible climate smart agriculture combinations, as you can see on the screen. And also, this is the first case. In the second case, we want now to combine empowerment and climate smart agriculture activities, of which now we end up with 4 categories. First is disempowered women from climate smart agriculture and adopters. Second is disempowered women from climate smart agriculture adopters household, empowered women from climate smart agriculture and adopters households, and empowered women from climate smart agriculture adopters households. So these are the categories for climate smart agriculture practices. So we also have some climate variables that we intend to use in our model, which is rainfall and temperature. And we are expecting to measure these, the impact of climate change using deviation from historical means. And thanks to the last week training by Professor Sagbo, we learned a lot and benefited from the training. So it allows us now, we will be to calculate more climate change variables that we can also include in our models. What is our outcome variable in our context, in our study? So we have 2 key outcome variables. First is household diet diversity, of which we measure by summing the 12 food groups that is consumed by the household. But also there is calories per adult equivalence, which we calculate based on the information provided by the household on what they have consumed in the last 7 days, because they collect quantities of each of food they consume in the last 7 days, which will allow us to calculate these calories per adult. And on productivity, we use crop yield, which is widely used in the literature, and it has shown to be a good measure for productivities. And the key variable or explanatory variable, we have women empowerment index. This is a composite index or weighted index that is based on some weighted sum of the 5D index and the gender disparity index, GDI. So the 5D index is a measure now, or is composed of 5 domains of empowerment, of which is made from 10 indicators of women empowerment. So the way index, the women empowerment index, is supposed to range from 0 to 1, and the cutoff value is 0.8. So any woman below 0.8 is considered disempowered, and above is empowered woman. So in estimation strategy now, in estimation, we are actually intending to use almost the similar models to answer both, like all 3 research questions with literal adjustment. So for presentation purpose, I will focus on one aspect, and I will explain the literal modification that are supposed to be done to be able to capture the objective, the other 2 objectives. So in this case, I will focus on the last objective of estimating the impact now of multiple climate smart agriculture practices on our outcome variables of interest, which is food security and productivity. So in the first equation, first we will estimate with a so-called multinomial endogenous selection model. Because remember, our outcome, our treatment, our variable or climate smart agriculture is multinomial in nature. So to be able to estimate, we will use this multinomial endogenous selection model. So to estimate this model, we needed to do it in 2 steps. In the first step, we estimate a multinomial logit model, of which we will be able to get the determinants of adoption of each practices or combination of practices. So in this case, the multinomial logit model will provide like 7 independent equations, and each covariate will indicate the effect or direction of the effect of each of the covariates on the particular climate smart agriculture. So equation 2 now will provide the probability the probability of adopting a particular climate smart agriculture activity. Why is it important to estimate this multinomial logit model in the first place? Because now in the multinomial endogenous switching regression model, we need to use some of the variable from output from the first stage in the second stage. I will explain it shortly. So in multinomial endogenous switching regression model now, we assume that a household will adopt a certain climate smart agriculture practices if the utility from adopting that practice or practice J is greater than any other combination. So in that case, we model it as it's indicated in equation 8, where Q1 is an outcome variable of interest, and Z, it includes covariates or explanatory variables that you want to use. But now, if we estimate this equation 8 using the normal or the usual always, it will be biased, because remember, household make a decision whether to adopt or not to adopt. So this creates some kind of biasness. So we need to address these bias issues. So how are we going to address the bias issue associated with the decision to adopt or not to adopt? So first, we add the Moontrack devices. Moontrack devices is actually the mean value of a strictly exogenous variable in the model. So these are time invariant and observed heterogeneity. So we'll add them in the model to control for time invariant and observed heterogeneities. And the second, now the first stage estimation become useful now. So we'll extract the means ratio from the first stage multinomial logit model and include them in equation 8 in order to control for unobserved variables. So it looks at the equation 9 now. So the lambdas represent now the means ratio, and the Z bars, it represents the Moontrack devices. But remember, but what I want to highlight here, by including Moontrack devices and inverse means ratio does not guarantee that we have completely eliminated the biasness associated with the decision to adopt climate smart agriculture practices. So in addition to that, we use some instrumental variables. So these instruments are excluded in vector Z, but excluded in vector Z, we use them as an instrument. For instance, to instrument for climate smart agriculture, we use number of times household receive extension services, which has direct impact on adoption, but does not have direct impact on the association or effect on the outcome variable of interest. Farmer groups is the main source of information. So it has effect on the adoption, but does not have effect on the outcome variable. We also plan to use number of adopters within 10 kilometers in the vicinity. So this also influence due to peer effect. Some farmers can decide to adopt or not to adopt due to peer effect. So we'll use it as an instrument of adoption. So combining instruments, means ratio, and the Moontrack devices will be able to address the issue of indigeneity associated with the decision to adopt climate smart agriculture practices. So how are we going to now be able to find the impact of these multiple climate smart agriculture practices? First, we estimate the average treatment effect, as you can see in equation 10. And then this average treatment effect, we calculate for both, for adopters, actuals, non-adopters, actuals, and counterfactuals, of which now by subtracting actuals and the counterfactuals, we get what we call now average treatment of the treated. We will also calculate average treatment of the untreated. So here we take subtracting equation 12, which are non-adopters if they adopt, non-adopters, equation 12, which is so non-adopters without adoption, and non-adopters if they adopt. So we will get average treatment of untreated. So to estimate gender heterogeneity effect, actually, this can be modeled in multinomial treatment, but also we can model it in linear or in linear regression with endogenous treatment effect. So keeping in mind that we can do it in multinomial, we just propose to use this one for this case, to use linear regression with endogenous treatment effect to estimate the gender heterogeneity effect. And now we have categories now of gender variables. So the first 4 categories relating to productivity, because remember productivity, we do it in plot level and we have female and male, but now in production, female can be a holder of a plot, can be owner of a plot, or can be a manager. So female now here it captures, we leave it like this to capture a broader aspect of female gender when it comes to production. And at a household level, of which I will explain it later, we have female-headed household and male-headed household, especially when we want to assess the impact at household level, which is food security. Yeah, so the G now, it represents our switching variables, whether a female manager adopted or not adopted. And DG now, our X is a covariance, and QJ, it represents now our interaction of female gender and adoption in equation 17. So equation 17 is observed if FJKT is equal to 1 when a household or a woman or female manager adopts a climate smart agriculture activity or not. And now the model now the model now reduces to equation 19, which is the final model of estimation, which it estimates now the impact of adopting this on this, given that taking into account the gender variable. We plan to use data from Tanzania, ILSM data, which is collected by the World Bank. We, together with the National Bureau of Statistics of Tanzania. So we have 4 waves that we plan to use. But now I need to highlight and clarify something here. So the first 3 waves, we use it in the impact evaluation of multiple climate smart agriculture using the panel structure of the data. The 4th wave is important because it will enable us now to merge with 2017 Feed the Future Interim Supplementary Survey. This survey contains 727 households, which we use it to calculate Women Empowerment Index. So we use information that the indexes and indicators of empowerment that we calculate using 2017 and merge them to the large survey of 2014, because it has other variables that can be help us to do more analysis. For climate change variables, we actually extracted data from NASA, which span from 1990s, and use the geocodes from the household, from the surveys that we have to extract location-specific weather variables and calculate the deviations now to measure the long-term or to measure the impact of the climate change. And here are some of the descriptives. Now I will start with the Women Empowerment Index, and I'll not explain like all of them, but I will concentrate, for instance, on the first row. It shows the disempowered women. So we can see about 71.6% of women in Tanzania, in that case, or in the sampled places are disempowered, and you can see the GDI is percentage of women with no gender parity is 51.8, but average empowerment gap is 14.7, and the 5D index, as it can look, it is 0.7, and the overall way index is 0.7, indicating now like disempowerment, because the cutoff value should be 0.8 to show that, to indicate whether women in agriculture in Tanzania are empowered or disempowered. And this table provides now the statistics or descriptive statistics for the 5D decomposed dimension. So as they look, this is the 5D dimension: production resources, income, leadership, and time. So these are dimensions of women empowerment. And the second row, it shows the indicators of empowerment. So these are the 10 indicators that I mentioned before. So we have input in decision up to the last column, which shows the leisure in time. The highlighted columns now in blue, it shows now the contribution of each of this indicator and each of the dimension on the disempowerment of women. So we can see resources is like leading contributor of disempowerment of women in Tanzania, then followed by work by time. So work burden and time for leisure is the second among the dimension of disempowerment. So table 3, we show statistics now, descriptives of adopters of different climate smart agriculture practices. As you can see across time, there is more high proportion of households have not adopted none of the climate smart agriculture practices, but it is not consistent. There is a jump across waves. So it is not like stable across waves. There is adoption, it is adoption across waves. But also a key observation is that most of them have adopted crop rotation compared to other climate smart agriculture practices. So to highlight, this statistics was generated at float level, but restricted only to maize farmers because we need comparability. So we have to restrict it to a certain crop, of which we pick maize for the case of Tanzania. In table 4, we provide the mean differences of outcome. So our reference outcome here is a non-adoption. So stars, it indicates a significant difference between non-adopters and adopters of either of the practice of climate smart agriculture activities. And as you can see in each column and significance levels indicated in the table. And this is just for highlight. I'll not spend much time on this based on the gender variables that I mentioned, the female headed, the female holders, female owned, and the female managers. So as previously mentioned, the stars indicate the significant difference between male and female. So a star means that male have more of whatever variables that we mentioned on the left-hand side than females. And this is just a distribution now. We just want to see the distribution of productivity between male-headed and female-headed and other gender variables, as you can see on the screen, that male have high productivity compared to male gender. And in the bottom, it is among non-adopters and multiple adopters. The red line or pink, whatever, not good in colors. Yeah, it indicates that multiple adopters have higher productivity compared to non-adopters at all. And this is just a summary statistics of the weather variable.
Can you start wrapping up because you're running out of time?
Yeah, I'm actually ending.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is just summary of the weather variables that we are using. We showed it in both like agroclimatic zone, unimodal, bimodal, and unimodal for the case of Tanzania. And now what is the implication for this? Currently, Tanzania is reviewing what we call climate smart agriculture plan, which ended 2019, and is looking for some for consultants to do this. So we are expecting these findings will be able to inform the review process and also making the new plan for the country. And this is our team composition. So we have our team leader, and his role are specified as above, and the rest of the team also roles are specified as above. So I don't think it's needed for me to mention everything. It's not that important. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. So we're going to turn to the discussants. Our first discussant is Eugenie Rose Fontep. She's a researcher associate at Center of Research in Economics and Management. She's currently pursuing a PhD in health economics and econometrics at the University of Yaoundé. Her research interests are development economics, conflict, violence, displacement, and peace building, impact evaluation methods, econometrics, labor market economics, human capital economics, gender inequalities, and climate. Eugenie? Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much, Dominic. And I want to congratulate the Tanzania team for the great work. So my presentation is on the proposal. So this is the content of the presentation.
Can you put it in slide mode, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so we have I want to highlight the research qualities of the presentation. I'll go and discuss their main research questions, the methodology in data, descriptive statistics, and some suggestions. So a summary of the presentation have been given before. So 3 main qualities can be highlighted. The research is on cutting-edge studies on the topics with main authors which have worked on it. They also include a very comprehensive definitions of the outcomes of interest and clearly explain and justify the choice of model and the identification strategy. However, the main research questions do not result from a critical review of the literature on the topic. And the main contribution that the author are highlighting in section 1.2 is not clear. What is the contribution, methodological, theoretical, of our empirical? The proposal is bringing the literature. Although there is a recent dissertation made by Fuchs on the gender roles and climate smart agricultural practice in rural Tanzania, the research mainly states that they are the first study to include a large sample of rural households in Tanzania. So they can gain of reviewing this dissertation and maybe highlighting the limit and the contribution based on this recent study. Moreover, in table 4, the main sample is almost 4 times higher than the women one. So there will be sample size bias in the result because the gap can be due to the high share of women among the farmers compared to women. So they can gain by calculating some weeks and apply them to their different groups before doing the empirical estimate. I also noticed that the welfare definition is missing in the text. So they need to explain to the reader how they are defining the welfare before measuring it. In terms of methodology, they are using a multinomial regressions. I was thinking that maybe as combining 3 practice is the best strategy compared to that of 2 or a single practice. They can order the different outcomes and either use other discrete choice model, which can then constitute a methodological contribution in the literature. Moreover, the adaptation of the Caesar practice and welfare may also be subject to a reverse causality bias. So they need to think about how to control for this. Now, in terms of data, they are not using the 4 waves, although they have mentioned that they will be using these 4 waves of the national panel data in Tanzania, but they are not using it in general. At least, although the data are available on the World Bank website since March 2021, so they can gain of using this. And by using this, I think it will allow them to avoid using the PTISS dataset, as this one is built on the 4th wave of the Tanzania panel data survey. And also, this is mainly because the second data set, the FISS that they are trying to use, is not representative of the national population in Tanzania. It has been focused only in 6 regions, and only households with female members were also interviewed. So I was also questioning the research about how representative will be this data in the analysis, and how they will merge this data with the 4 other panel data surveys. The descriptive analysis in the Women Empowerment Index, the sample size is very small. We are about 500 or 700 women and men compared to the 3,000 and 5,000 of the overall survey. So it is very difficult to explain or to understand how the share of the sample size have decreased so highly, and then it can implies some inconsistency bias in the future estimates. So the author can try to see how they can deal with that. The research proposal also needs to clarify how the author intend to control for spillover effects when they are using the average treatment effect and the average treatment on treated. So they can try to explain how this bias will be controlled. And finally, also do not explain how representative is farmer of each group across the different regions of the country. So they can also kind of splitting their analysis by regions for more relevant policy implications. So finally, these are some suggestions that we are bringing to the research proposal. First one, we want them to skip or to keep the second data away from the analysis for at least 3 reasons. The first one being that the data is not representative of the country, as highlighted earlier. The second one is that this also data is a part of the 4th wave of the national panel survey in Tanzania. And lastly, the main topics developed in this data was on food security, which is not the main focus of the research proposal. And in terms of control variables, they use the years of education rather than the level of education. And the literature is clear that the level of the years of education is more subject to indigeneity bias compared to the level of education. So they are really encouraged to use level of education instead of the years of education. As they are using instrumental variable approach to control for some indigeneity bias, they need to perform the stock and Yogo or test for weak instrument to be sure that the instruments are not weak. They need also to update the literature with and benefit from the recent and very rich literature on the topic that are cited in the comment. They also need to use the latest decomposition approach of 14 Limi and FIPO, which gives them a more flexible way to disaggregate the different components of the which can explain the gap, and also the weight of each characteristic in explaining the weight between women and men. They can also disaggregate the estimates by region, as I stated earlier. So that to design smart policy recommendations which are easier for local government actions. And finally, they need to control for the number of years of cropping on the same land, because this can affect how likely farmer will be to switch from a single CSAP or to a multiple CSAP. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Those were very detailed and constructive comments. So Jorge Davalos is our next discussant, and he's an associate professor at Universidad del Pacífico in Lima, Peru. He holds a PhD in econometrics from the University of Geneva. His research focuses on applied labor econometrics, impact evaluation and trade and labor market outcomes in developing countries. Jorge, You have 7 minutes.
Okay, hello everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay, I think that someone has to disable or to stop sharing their screen before I can do it. Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Okay, let me. Okay. Can you see it well?
No, we can't see it.
Okay, sorry. So in that way, just like that?
No, we have a nice view of the mountains.
Sorry, so I will stop sharing my webcams, maybe. Maybe that's the issue.
No, nothing.
Okay, just a second, please. Maybe. Okay. Sorry, I have to stop sharing my screen. Maybe that's the issue. So sorry, my webcam.
That's good. Yes. And
Okay.
can you put it in the slide format?
Okay.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much for the Tanzanian team. This was a nice proposal that we have reviewed in the past, and we had a pleasure to give suggestions to the team, and the team has amended the proposal from the latest version. Of course, there's still some work to be done, and we will try to summarize the ways forward very briefly. First of all, this is an ambitious proposal since the beginning. The former version had a broader set of objectives, and they came up with three new objectives, which were the essential ones from the previous version. They tried to first identify how CSA technologies might help cope and mitigate the vulnerability towards climate change, and in particular, they try to measure what are the gender gaps in CSA and CSAP adoption. The second objective is how women empowerment could help boost the welfare gains from the adoption of CSAPs. And finally, the third objective refers to what are the differentiated impacts or the gender impacts of multiple adoptions of CSAP on agriculture productivity and food security. These three objectives are obviously intertwined, they are interrelated. And the main issues came up from the review of the revised proposal. Even though the proposed specification, which is a multinomial switching regression, can be easily written on paper. I mean, that's what they have done. It is nicely written. It's quite different when you need to estimate this type of models with real data. These type of models tend to be difficult to identify, given that by definition, the correction terms that are added into the Dubin-McFadden corrections and analog corrections are highly correlated. This is not very well motivated in the proposal, sorry, but the literature is quite clear on this. It is not enough with getting an estimate of a model. Even if you use a two-step model, we need to be sure that these are robust estimates, and this is hard to motivate, particularly when you have a lot so many regimes, which is your case. You have 8 regimes. There was a comment during your presentation from Abdel Karim Arar, who said that these models can be estimated in one step. Yes, of course, but these are easier estimated when you have only a few categories, given the high dimension of the variance covariance matrix. one thing that should be also motivated and poses a problem is that empowerment is acknowledged to be endogenous as well in some papers in the literature, right? And this is not an easy task because you propose in your second objective to measure the moderating effects of empowerment on the relationship between CSAP adoption and welfare. So this becomes really complex when your moderating variable is also endogenous, right? And okay, of course, when you have age regimes, accurate standard errors are cumbersome to estimate because you need to go into the bootstrap methods in order to get accurate standard errors, which might be, again, quite difficult in some of your, to validate some of your three hypotheses. So another issue concerns the instruments. Some of them, or particularly one of them, has potential. I consider the Farmers Association in the village like a potential good instrument. I think that this refers to the literature on social networks. And this is a nice literature that motivates how the integration of the household with the community might help, might tie the relationships and might provide better information to the housing in order to get better access to technology. But I have some issues with the other two. The number of times a household receives extension services might also be correlated to wealth and then welfare. And of course, productivity, because highly productive households may be prone to receive extensions, or the opposite. Maybe these extension services were provided to the less wealthy households. And we have another concern with the number of adopters in the village as an instrument. Might not be the number of adopters a function of wealth and welfare and productivity. So I have to agree with the previous discussant. I think that we need a simpler model. Probably a model that disentangles some of these three hypotheses in order to privilege some of them, the ones that are more or better motivated by the literature and that could be better contribute to the existing gaps. And in order to do so, it will be quite important to simplify the econometric specification, probably by proposing a simpler model where CSAP is rather an order category. This would require probably the definition of a taxonomy, a proper taxonomy that could identify levels of CSAP adoption. This could help us treat your endogenous variable as continuous variable. And if we can treat it as continuous, well, we have the possibility to test whether your instruments are weak or whether your instruments fulfill the orthogonality assumptions. We have the possibility even to interact this instrument with other regressors in order to test some of your moderating assumptions and so on. So overall, my final suggestion is to try to reconfigure your research questions in order to consider an approach where your CSAP could be an ordered continuous variable. I have other minor comments, but I think that I can send them to the team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge, again, for very constructive comments.